This is going to sound like a hot take here, but I don't see a discernible difference between him and Alex Madison. Now, Alex Madison, funny enough.
We're going to fight.
I'm out for war again today.
Let me ask you, what round would he have to fall?
Far. I'd take him 7th, 8th, maybe.
Wow.
A couple rounds.
Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell. They don't even seem sure.
So you're telling me you're not in on Gardner Minshew?
No. The quarter.
I don't think it's a good idea betting on a year 8 breakout. That's just me, right?
Okay.
I would know a lot about this because almost every single player I draft every year, I end up regretting drafting.
So we've got
I'm really good
the
at
right
this,
person
actually.
here. We got the expert. When you're drafting in fantasy this year, you're expecting to hit, but the reality is you don't always hit. Remember Austin Eckler, top 6 pick last year. Tony Pollard was in the 2nd round. So today we have brought experts from all around the world to tell you players that you will regret drafting in fantasy football this year. We're starting off with Mason from Flock Fantasy. You know him, you love him. Mason, a player that you think people will regret drafting.
Personally, I don't think it's a good idea betting on a year 8 breakout. That's just me, right?
Okay.
If somebody hasn't been productive in fantasy for the first 7 years of their career, year 8, I'm not expecting it to change. I'm going Curtis Samuel.
Oh, okay.
All right. Great situation in Buffalo. Overall empty depth chart. And we know that we want to be betting on wide receivers in good offenses. But you're looking at Curtis Samuel as a player now dealing with an injury, a player that in best ball drafts right now is only 1 round cheaper than Keon Coleman. And at the end of the day, he's had 1 season in his NFL career averaging more than 9.0 fantasy points per game from a half PPR perspective. So from a shallow redraft league perspective, he has never been startable in fantasy, even though it's always appeared, oh, this guy has the upside, this guy has the talent. If only he had the right situation. Well, he's had a zillion different situations, and none of them have ever been, quote unquote, good enough.
Okay, so I know what people are going to say to you as a reply, so I want to hit you with these.
Okay.
It's all hard-hitting questions. You mentioned the only time he's averaged over 10 points per game in half PPR, right?
9.
I think in full PPR is like 13 or 12 or something around there. But that was with his offensive coordinator that is now in Buffalo. Does that matter to you, or are you just like, ah? And then the other thing is most vacated targets in Buffalo of any team in the NFL. So you don't think they're going to Curtis, then who are they going to?
I think if I had to go through and make a bet on an individual player here, if there was a large gap between the price points of Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, and Curtis Samuel, then at that point I can understand, oh, okay, Kincaid hasn't shown the ability to dominate with the high target share. Maybe Keon Coleman is an unproven rookie. Let's maybe get a sneaky little Curtis Samuel in here. My thing is Curtis Samuel, I've seen go ahead of Keon Coleman in drafts. His ADP is 1 round behind Keon Coleman's. So they're almost priced to be the same guy, where I can't buy into that, even if it is the same offensive coordinator that Samuel previously had.
Okay, so between Shakir and Samuel, I'm assuming you're Shakir then.
Shakir and Samuel, I think that their range of outcomes should be viewed as very similar. At this point, Samuel does have an ADP that's about 2 rounds ahead of Shakir. So at cost, I'm going to go Shakir. Now, Samuel did just suffer an injury, turf toe. So if that drags his ADP down to be closer to Shakir, then at that point, I think it's a coin flip. And if you wanted to go Curtis Samuel, I'm not going to fault you for it. I just think that he's probably priced 2 to 3 rounds too expensive for me.
Okay, well, you heard it here first. You got to pass up on Curtis Samuel. All right, next we have got Corey from Fantasy Stock Exchange. Corey, you know the deal. Who are you not drafting this year? I've heard this is a hype name.
Yeah, I mean, Mason probably came on here and talked about like a 9th round pick that you'd regret drafting. And I'm saying Davante Adams, a guy that you mentioned Tony Pollard at the top of the show. We're talking about the same range, mid-second round. It's not that I don't think Davante Adams is still a great wide receiver. He's still probably one of the best in the league. But we saw signs of decline last year from him, yards per route run, receiving grade. Those kind of breadcrumbs sometimes lead you to a guy that you overdraft based on name value. And when you stack up the risk kind of profile of Davante Adams, you have Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell. They don't even seem sure.
So you're telling me you're not in on Gardner Minshew?
No. The quarterback situation is 32nd bottom in the NFL. Sure. You have an offense that wants to probably run the football too, not a very pass-heavy team. Davante Adams, vibes-wise, like he seems like he's going to get upset there pretty quick. We all watched some of the receiver documentary. He doesn't seem very happy there. So for me, it's like if he got traded to the Jets, I'd probably change this opinion to some degree. But as it currently stands with him as a Raider, I feel like you're drafting a guy who's bound to disappoint you if you're thinking you're getting primo Green Bay Davante Adams of old.
I hear you. He's like a safe name. I know. I remember in another video you said Aaron Jones is a safe name. We're also used to that name. So I hear you. And pretty much every year, these metrics have gone down. The points per game have gone down. Now you got Brock Bowers there. So I'm a little bit scared. Like third round, I'm okay with it. But I agree. Second round, I think there are players that are more exciting there. So I'm definitely with you. Let's move on to the next take. All right. And now we've got the other member of Fantasy Stock Exchange here, Danny, a.k.a. Kung Fu Danny. All right. Who are you not drafting this year? You're telling people if you draft this player, you're going to regret it.
Yeah, and it's really funny that Corey already made the case for how bad the Raiders' offense projects.
Oh, no.
I'm going with a different Raider. I'm going with Zamir White, running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. And I understand people are going to cling to the 4-game sample size at the end of last year, 15 PPR points per game against a very soft schedule down the stretch. But when you really boil down what the situation is for Zamir White going into 2024, the Raiders are going to pick in the top 5, top 10 area of the NFL draft. So realistically, from a game script perspective, I don't really see a 2-down grinder like Zamir White being able to pay off, and specifically when it comes to touchdowns, because quite frankly, he's not a great receiver out of the backfield. I mean, I've heard you guys talk about Dylan Laube potentially being a sleeper, especially out of the backfield as a receiving threat.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a discernible difference in talent between the tackles, and this is going to sound like a hot take here, but I don't see a discernible difference between him and Alex Madison. Now, Alex Madison, funny enough, similar situation last year where look at all the available volume there. Obviously, Dalvin Cook left, Josh Jacobs leaves. I think there's a very realistic possibility where we're looking at this year's Alexander Madison. And again, if Zamir White was an 8th, 9th round pick, perfectly okay with it. On Underdog, you want to grab him in that range, be my guest. But on home leagues, when he's going in round 5 and you're passing on some of those wide receivers in that range for, again, a 2-down banger on a bottom 5 potential offense, there's just way better ways to allocate that fantasy opportunity cost. So for me, personally, I'm drafting receiver in that range.
We're going to fight because Zamir's my guy this year.
Really?
Yeah, he is.
Okay.
Personally, just based off the volume, like honestly, the volume. And I actually think his price is pretty affordable. Like I see him go in the 7th round most times. Sometimes he sneaks into the 8th. Definitely wouldn't take him 6th. In a 12-man league. But yeah, definitely a my guy this year. I don't think the offense is going to be good. But my difference personally between Alexander Madison last year and Zamir White this year is last year, Kevin O'Connell's offense is very pass-focused. They're not really like running back-centric. And we know with Antonio Pierce, the rushing attempts per game went up when he took over as a head coach. I think their goal is to run the ball a lot. I think on the goal line, he's the unquestioned guy. And I guess just a difference of opinion, which is great to see because I do think he is a talented player. I mean, we forget he was a 5-star recruit, tore both of his ACLs. He's really only getting back to like his old self. So I definitely hear you, but a city that has thrived on giving one guy touches, I don't know. I'm in on Zamir.
Potentially. Again, everything we're hearing from Antonio Pierce, he loves the guy. It almost seems like it feels like Zamir White is his son. And I'll give you credence that when he falls to the 8th round area, you want to draft him there for the guaranteed touches, especially if you're in a 0 RB approach. I'm cool with it.
Well, I know that in tomorrow's draft, I can let him fall down the board then.
Go ahead.
We'll see what happens.
I'll be drafting the receivers.
I love it. All right, we've got Nathan from Domain Fantasy Football. We love what these guys do. Tell me a player that people are going to regret drafting.
Yeah, I'm out for war again today, and I cannot get myself to draft George Pickens.
Okay.
I know he's incredibly popular right now going into 24. Now that Deontay Johnson is gone, it's undeniable, right, that he has really, really solid opportunity to be productive this year. And even with Roman Wilson coming in, I would say, like, I don't really think Roman Wilson is going to be the guy to eat into his workload theoretically because they play different positions. Really, their skill sets are completely different. But with George Pickens, part of it is the offense, because it's Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields that are throwing him the ball. And the other part of it is the fact that he is just not a consistently effective route runner. He doesn't win his routes on a consistent basis. He's not necessarily a guy that's demonstrated yet that he can be a very diverse route runner in the slot and on the outside. Because what he has done in the last couple of years since he came into the league is his ability to win contested catches on the outside, highlight reel type catches, has been really, really good for big playability, but we haven't seen the consistency yet, and I just really, really have major questions about that this year, especially in an Arthur Smith offense, which is
I can see
a big point as well.
You know, I am a George Pickens guy myself this year, so I've fallen into the trap, unfortunately. But it's funny you talk about Ayuk because if you look at per catch metrics, it's like Ayuk, Pickens, they're like in a class of their own last year. So I definitely hear where you're coming from. The the way I view it is if that was his floor potentially, what could he do now that Deontay Johnson's gone? He had about 22% of the target share there.
Yeah.
So now that he's gone, what could that clear up? But I definitely understand the concerns with the quarterback play. I think we're all like Arthur Smith quarterback play. Honestly, that's why he's not like a 3rd round pick, because we do have to ask that question about Russell Wilson. So let me ask you, what round would he have to fall for you to be in on him?
Far.
Yeah.
So like a couple
he's available
rounds.
in round 6.
I'd take him 7th, 8th, maybe.
Wow.
A couple
Okay.
rounds.
Well, look, this is why we love having different people on the channel, because you've got different perspectives. So
yeah,
it's great to hear.
The one thing that Pickens has going for him is even though his target quality rating in general is not super high because of the type of wide receiver that I believe he'll remain to be, I do think his floor is going to be pretty set since he really is the best receiving threat there. He's kind of just one of those guys that's going to get 110 targets, and I think that's going to be it. Arthur Smith weirds me out from like a fantasy production perspective. I don't really know who to like and who to dislike there, so I've really just decided to dislike the entire offense.
That's fair.
In fantasy.
I get it. No one's projecting to be a top 10 offense, so if you want to avoid bad offenses, I totally hear where you're coming from. But appreciate you. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got the other member here of Domain Fantasy Football. Obviously, we've got Avery with us. Avery, a player that people are going to regret drafting. They're going to cry over it later. Who's that going to be?
Well, I would know a lot about this because almost every single player I draft every year, I end up regretting drafting.
So we've got
I'm really good
the
at
right
this,
person
actually.
here. We got the expert.
So naturally, Kenneth Walker is a guy this year that I'm really not comfortable drafting. I feel like people are going to regret it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think people are projecting him. I mean, if you're drafting him where you're drafting him, you're projecting him to take a step up from what he's done in the NFL so far, right? I mean, he's played in 15 games each of his first 2 years, and he was the running back 16 and the running back 19 in PPR leagues. And from a points perspective, he had 5 less points from his first year to his second year. And so this is a guy that really hasn't shown, like when you're talking about where he's been drafted the last couple of years, I mean, last year he's being drafted as well, a top 13 running back, I think. I mean, he had a pretty good price tag on him, and he took a step back. And so everybody's going to point to the offensive situation in Seattle and say, okay, they're bringing in a new head coach, new offensive coordinator. It's going to be great. But what people probably aren't taking into account is with that offense in Seattle, you're probably going to see an uptick in the passing volume, if anything. They're going to be more pass happy. You want to see an archetype of what that's going to look like, what that offense is going to look like, and how it's going to function. Let's look at Washington last year. And Washington, obviously, they were able to support a couple of productive running backs, but the entire offense was centered around who? Michael Penix and the 3 receivers, right? Yeah. So I think when you're looking at Seattle, you talk about Geno Smith and the 3 receivers, I think that's where the offense is going to work this year. I think Kenneth Walker does have a chance to be productive. But again, I'm looking at his fantasy production. I'm just not impressed. I mean, his attempts have never really gotten above 230. He broke 1,000 yards his rookie year. He's had 8 and 9 touchdowns in both those years. But the main thing for me when you're talking about Kenneth Walker, his floor is so freaking low. His floor is almost 0. Why? Because look at his targets. 35 targets his first year, 37 targets his second year. And so when I'm looking at that, combined with the fact that I don't think the ceiling is super high, I'm talking about a low ceiling, low floor player. And when you're drafting this guy, you're drafting him in what everybody calls the running back dead zone. I would much rather just take wide receiver in that range.
I get you. A lot of unknowns. They want to pass the ball more. Charbonnet's a better pass catcher. So Charbonnet, I guess, you talked about Charbs, but would he be, if you were to target a running back in this backfield, would it be Charbonnet then? Or are you just avoiding this backfield entirely?
I mean, Charbonnet, when you're talking about his price, it's not bad. I mean, you're getting him in deeper drafts, maybe you're taking him, but a lot of times he's making it to waivers in most home leagues. You're talking about 12, 13 round drafts. And so what I think I want to do is if you're drafting and you have IR slots in your league and you draft players like TJ Hawkinson, like Jonathan Brooks, you can throw him on IR, maybe then use a waiver claim to get Zach Charbonnet, and then in hopes that he actually does produce from a receiving game standpoint. That being said, I feel like they did use Zach Charbonnet like that a little bit last year, and he still wasn't fantasy productive. Probably going to expect more of the same this year. But
going through my projections, I was pretty surprised at the lack of dominance Ken Walker's had over this backfield as far as rushing attempts gone over the last couple of years. Even without Charbonnet, I was a little bit surprised. So that's definitely a concern. If you're betting on Charbonnet, you are betting on this offense, or Walker, you're betting on this offense taking a big leap, which it's possible. Right?
I think it's
definitely possible.
But again, I think the specialty of that coaching staff, and I think it's passing. I think for Kenneth Walker, you would have to project a breakout for him. You're in. Going into his third year, this is the time to do it. This is it for Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, I agree.
It legit is. So I just don't want to bet on that. I'd rather just take a wide receiver in that range.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. Domain is not drafting Ken Walker.
I'll probably regret that, but it's fine.
All right, well, you heard from some of the brightest minds in the industry of players they're avoiding. Funnily enough, if you know my channel, a lot of those guys I love, so it's good to hear some different perspectives on this channel. Hey, just to give you guys a heads up, if you want my cheat sheet, if you want to know exactly what pick I would make when you're on the clock, all you got to do is become a Mother Flocker member on the Flock Fantasy website. Sign up with the promo code LAND, you'll get 30% off, and I will review your team personally. So we appreciate y'all. Check out the pinned comment, and we'll see you very soon. All up. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.